This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. It's been a while since we've talked about technology, and since some new tech is on the way, including 5G mobile technology, we'll spend some time later in the program investigating where technology is headed and where it's taking us. First, though, a different kind of technology, podcasting. It is all the rage, and if you are a regular listener, you know that WFAE has been conducting the Queen City PodQuest, a search for the latest, greatest podcast. Or at least for podcast producers who have an idea that our judges think or thought just might take them to new heights. Well, over the weekend, the decision was made in front of a live audience.
Drum roll, please. After 6 months, almost 400 entrants, nearly 100,000 votes, more than 60 hours of PodQuest mentorship and training, the grand prize winner, Charlotte's Next Great Podcast, as determined by tonight's panel of judges, receiving a cash prize of $1,000 and a podcast development deal at WFAE. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in applauding the Queen City PodQuest winner. Work it.
A little dramatic. That's the voice of WFAE's Joni Deutsch, our on-demand content and audience engagement guru. She is with us in our Spirit Square studio, and since this was her baby, I will let her introduce our two winners. But first, let me turn your mic on. I'm a professional. You may have noticed. Go ahead.
It's okay. We're in radio land now. Well, yes, I was honored to be able to help with this Queen City PodQuest for the last, 6 months now, December 2018. So Work It was the winning team of the night out of 5 finalists as determined by the judges, as I mentioned in my dramatic voice. And in that team of Work It, Stephanie Hale is one of the hosts. Kevin Young, who's not with us this morning, but who is also with us this morning, is Jill Bierce. And both of them, Stephanie and Jill, are here to chat about their idea and how it came about.
Well, good morning and congratulations.
Good morning.
Good
morning.
Was
Thanks.
it a big surprise? I mean,
Yes.
did you jump out of your skin when your podcast was named?
So I have never won anything in my entire life ever, and I was pretty sure that there was no way we were going to win, and I was totally shocked. My kids in the audience were totally shocked that their mom could win anything, so it was a pretty fun experience.
What about you, Jill?
I am still surprised. I actually listened to that dramatic announcement multiple times over the weekend and sent it out to my family to prove that I actually did win, because I don't think they believed me.
Let's go back over those numbers, Joni, for a second, because you said almost 400 entrants.
Right.
I think 370 was the number exactly.
It was.
100,000 votes.
Votes, yeah.
Good Lord. And you narrowed the entries down to a top 5, and over the weekend at the NASCAR Hall of Fame, you had the unveiling of the winner. How surprised were you that so many people entered this thing?
Surprised. I mean, you have, I think the recent stat, there's like 700,000 podcasts on Apple Podcast, but
wow.
and you think that's huge, but then you look at the numbers of individuals, like total audience that could be for podcasting. Not everyone listens to podcasts. We think it's the big thing. We think every single person on earth listens to it. It's growing in popularity,
right.
but not a lot of people listen, and even less so make them. So I was expecting 100, maybe 200 in the Charlotte area to submit their ideas. But as you said, almost 370 some, and we had high schoolers, college graduates, we had retirees. While some of them were established podcasters, a lot of them had never even thought of recording their voice or their stories.
What does that say about podcasts and podcasting?
I think it just is it's the great equalizer. You know, we work in radio, you and I, Mike, and we love our jobs. Obviously, it's why we do it. But we're in a position that not a lot of others have by being on a microphone, by being able to share our stories or the stories of our community. And I think that's what podcasting allows. It's allowing you to take up your iPhone audio memo app and record something and share it with others. And you don't have to feel like you need a public radio voice or you need to hit a certain demographic. It's just a beautiful thing.
Had either of you, Jill or Stephanie, ever done a podcast before you started working on your submission for the contest?
I had never done a podcast before, and we still have only done our pitch. We haven't produced our first episode yet.
What? Get out.
I know.
Yeah. I've been interviewed on a couple, but I've never produced one. The idea of producing one terrifies me. So
Really, why?
because I think it
See how
might-
easy this is? This is just a
know.
podcast on the radio.
Yeah, like this looks easy, but I think somebody else is doing the hard part.
So what is it about podcasting for you? Why do you want to do this? Because it actually is, newsflash, a lot of work.
So the reason I want to do a podcast is because I think, first of all, I think audio is so cool. I think it's, in my opinion, it's superior to video and other forms of media because you don't have to give it your 100% attention, but you can give it a deeper attention than you could give even video because it's like a hot medium. Like you've got to be there imagining it yourself. So you can clean the house while you do it, or you can just sit there and be totally immersed in a way that you can't really with video. So I love the format and have wanted to do something. I mean, honestly, like if I had to do this thing a few years ago where it's like, if you weren't doing your current job, what job would you be doing? And I literally wrote down Mike Collins' job.
Really?
And absolutely.
Watch out,
Well, here,
You said you're not feeling well. I'll take it. But to have just the opportunity to talk to people, bring their stories, have a conversation that's just really fun over and over with new people all the time. I can't think of anything that seems more fun than that.
wow. What about you, Stephanie? Jill, excuse me. I'm
That's
sorry.
all good. So I consume everything on demand. So podcasts are perfect for me because the only thing I sit down on time and watch live is Game of Thrones. But outside of that, I don't watch anything live. And so being able to consume a podcast on demand is amazing. So I'm really excited about like that prospect. But telling stories, like I really like getting to underneath somebody's story. And getting them to kind of peel back the layers of all of the surface chit chat that we do, and get to something underneath it. So when Stephanie approached me with this idea, I was like totally on board.
Well, I was going to ask next question. There are three of you involved in this. It's Stephanie and Jill, our guest today, and also I can't find his name.
Kevin Young.
Thank you, Kevin Young, who have come together. How did the three of you meet? Whose idea was this to do a podcast about working?
Stephanie's fault. It's all Stephanie's fault.
So maybe it's Steve's fault. So we have a friend named Steve Nazarian, and he came to me and said, have you heard about the Queen City PodQuest? Do you have an idea? And I have been thinking about this idea about work because I work in leadership development and executive coaching, and it's always so interesting to me when you start talking to somebody, even people who are very successful in their careers, they have a complicated relationship with their job. You'd think they would be like on cloud nine with this big, powerful job where they're making a lot of money. But then in an intimate conversation with their coach, you hear a very different, more complicated kind of experience. And I'm just so intrigued by that. And I see it in every job. And that's just so interesting to me, that relationship people have with their job. So I wanted to do something about that. And I knew we were going to need a team to do it. Jill and I know each other because we do TEDx speaker coaching together. And so I've seen Jill have somebody come in the room with a story that they think they want to tell and then leave with something much more vulnerable, much deeper, and much more connected to their actual unique experience. So I knew she would be a great person to help engage in these stories. And then Kevin wins everything, like Spartan races wins everything. Nobody comes in ahead of Kevin on anything. And so since this was a competition, I was like, Kevin, how do you win something? Can you just show me that? And he did.
Really? Well, clearly. So what did he tell you? What's the secret sauce?
Work really, really hard and get a bunch of other people to work hard for you. So that's the thing about the Facebook voting round was getting a bunch of other people to work hard for you. And for me, that was like torture to be begging family and friends to vote for you.
To vote early and often?
Oh, gosh.
Every single day.
Yeah, and that was the thing is that part of this Queen City podcast was allowing the community to, yes, of course, submit their ideas, but also for the community to vote for those ideas. WFAE didn't really do a lot of judging in this process. It was external factors. The community voting for those hundreds of entrants, which then made a top 5, which Work It was one of the 5. And then after that, the judges at the last Saturday's live event, they are the ones that determined the winner of the night. So we really put the power of podcasting in the hands of the community.
Tell me why, Joni, because you are in charge of our podcast department here at WFAE, and we produce a lot of award-winning podcasts. Why was WFAE, why were you interested in going out and seeking somebody who will not become part of the station necessarily, and helping them to find themselves on a podcast, helping them to develop their podcast. Aren't we cannibalizing your podcasts and radio?
Never. No, I think what it is, it's saying, yes, we are making podcasts that are doing very well in the community or audiences internationally, like She Says with Sarah D'Elia, or Tommy Tomlinson Southbound, or FAQ City Nick Delacanal, or even Amplifier, the one I host. But sometimes the best ideas don't come from the ones that are currently in your head. They come from the voices that typically aren't, working in your line of work. And in this case, it just allowed everyone outside of WFAE to say, hey, WFAE, these are the ideas that you're missing out on, the holes that you're not filling with news and information, and even podcasts. So I think it was important to say, the community has a voice in what we do. Otherwise, what's the point of a public radio station if we're not saying the public's involved in the process?
So what, of the other submissions, so there were 370 submissions, were they special interests, each of them, or were they general, they just want to do general topics? What were some of the things that people wanted to do with their podcast?
Oh, it just ranged. I will say probably a quarter of them, almost half of them, all had the same idea of, I want this to be Mike Collins' Charlotte Talks, but with this, which I think is a very nice compliment.
You got to pass those ideas along.
Oh, well. But no, it was a lot of roundtable discussions and panel discussions. But then, I think more than half, though, were really just conversations about maybe beekeeping, or they were about wine, or they were about pregnancy or healthcare, sports, a lot of history podcasts. People wanted to know, what is the history of Charlotte? And a couple of dog podcasts. So really, if you name a genre or a topic, it probably was represented in this PodQuest.
So how did you narrow it down to 5? There were 5 going into the weekend.
It was the community. I mean, the community in February, after we did the submission round in December of 2018 for about 2 months, and all those entries came in from all the counties around WFAE's listening area. We did basically a vote per day, where anyone, anywhere, could vote for the podcast once per day that they wanted to see proceed to the next round of the PodQuest. So Work It was one of them. The other 4 in the top 5 receiving the most votes were Bicycling in the Queen City and Beyond, Next Door Docs, Teachable Moments, and then also Bicycling, Queen City Beyond.
Choose Our Own Adventure.
Choose Our Own Adventure, thank you. So those are the top 5, and for the last 2 months, they have been receiving mentorship, where they've learned everything there is to know about podcasting.
Yeah, I think you mentioned 69 hours of mentorship and technical advice.
Yes, it was each week we had a few different meetings and conversations because all 5 were different podcast topics. Choose Our Own Adventure is pop culture related. We had a medical one with Next Door Docs. The list goes on. And Work It, of course, being one that was about the in and outs, not so much of the work, but the people working it. They all have different concepts and formats. So, yeah, I mean, we went into marketing, we went into audience development. And Mike, you even joined us for one of those mentorship calls to give advice on how to interview and to let people share their stories on the microphone.
So who were the judges, and what was the criteria they used to pick the winner?
So the judges on the PodQuest live finale, which took place last Saturday, were representatives from the community. So we had Brian Baltashevitz, who is the founder of the Queen City Podcast Network, which just launched here in Charlotte. WFAE's own Greg Collard, who some may know as being our newsroom director. We had Anasa Senegal from the CPCC. She's also a WFAE board member. The Gantt Center's Angie Chandler, and then also Creative Mornings' Matt Olin, all representing different parts of the community.
Okay. When we come back, we'll hear a little snippet of your submission, Jill and Stephanie, to see why Work It got the nod from the judges as the winner of our Queen City PodQuest. We're coming right back at Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Greer Walker, a regional CPA and business advisory firm dedicated to helping middle-market companies in Charlotte and the Carolinas manage their cybersecurity and business resiliency risks. GreerWalker.com. And Opera Carolina, bringing to the stage Tchaikovsky's tragic romance, Eugene Onegin, where the heroine must choose honor or love. May 9th, 11th, and 12th. More at operacarolina.org. Tomorrow on this program, Mayor Viola Lyles joins us, and she's bringing along City Manager Marcus Jones to talk about the city's proposed budget for the next fiscal year. Good news, they're going to be revenue neutral, which means city taxes are probably not going to rise. And that budget was presented to the City Council on Monday. We go over the details. We also discussed the rising rates of homicides and the shooting last week at UNC Charlotte, as well as the release of body cam footage in the police shooting of Danquarius Franklin, among other things. Plus, your questions for the mayor tomorrow on this program at 9.
This planet has 8 million known species, but our species is on the verge of eliminating 1 million of them. The UN says human activity poses an unprecedented threat to life on Earth. It's not too late to turn it around, but are we really willing to do what it takes? I'm Joshua Johnson, a guide to saving the planet, next time on 1A.
That's coming up at 10 following Charlotte Talks with Mike Collins on 90.7 WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source.
It's Charlotte Talks on Listener Funded, 90.7 WFAE and 90.3 WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We're talking to and about the winners of WFAE's PodQuest. The winning entry was Work It, and the two producers and hosts that we have with us, at least from Work It, are Jill Bierz and Stephanie Hale. Also with us, Joni Deutsch, who is our on-demand content and audience engagement manager at WFAE. This was her little baby, more than a little, 370 entries, 100,000 votes. Yikes. You had to come up with a pitch for this. You just couldn't say, okay, we want to be a part of your contest. I'm curious about what your elevator speech was. How did you position what you want to do as a podcast to WFAE, to the PodQuest people, and to the judges? How did you do it?
So you want the actual pitch we used in the competition? Because we have that totally memorized.
Do you really?
Absolutely. I practiced it like 50 times.
It's like a TED Talk, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
But basically what the pitch was is that I've had conversations with people for years about their jobs. And every time I have one, I'm really amused by how it quickly goes to the relationship that people have with their jobs. So I gave a little example at the night of the pitch event where I know this guy who works like at one of the big banks as a mid-level manager in their IT department. Mm-hmm. And he loves his job, but it's not what's on his business card. What he actually does is leadership development work like what I do, but he has to do it under the guise of this IT title so HR doesn't find out and shut him down. And he's laughing the whole time he's telling me this because he loves that he's working, like doing great work for the company, but he also has to sneak around to do it, which adds like a little extra level of fun for him. And he loves being like subversive. Like he's doing great stuff, but nobody can find out. And it's so funny to me that like that's what he loves about, like that's a piece of what he loves about his job and a piece of the way he thinks about himself is that he's doing this, kind of countercultural thing, and it's powerful. And I want to tell those kinds of stories. And
you also, as part of your submission process, I guess, had to kind of produce a little bit of a podcast. And we're going to play a little piece from what you produced, because this is not some high-level guy working at a $500,000 a year job and on the surface looking like he probably enjoys it because of all the money he makes. But really hating it because of all the pressure that comes along with it. This is a completely different kind of job. Let's hear a short clip.
So while recently visiting my parents, I went with my dad to his standing Thursday barber appointment. He's had this appointment for more than 55 years. To put that in perspective, my parents have been married for 48 years, which means my dad has been seeing his barber longer than he's been with my mom. So that got me curious about barbers in Charlotte. And what am I missing by not having a standing appointment with a barber? Like Buster.
Well, my government name is Andre Gilliard. I'm also known as Buster. I'm a barber. That's what I do. That's what I love. It's different when you work in a job and you like, damn, I don't want to be here. I'm tired of this or that, blah, blah, blah. But it's different when you go into the job and you love what you do. I love what I do, and I love to cut hair.
To Buster, his job means a lot more than just clippers and scissors. It's independence, security, and community. After all, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. Across town, another barber, Patrick, does the same exact job, but has a slightly different motivation.
My grandfather was a barber for 70 years, and then when it came time for me, I could feel myself wanting to carry on my family legacy and just the tradition that they've done for generations. It's always been about the relationships. Yes, I love that I get to be creative and get to work with my hands every day, but what truly matters to me is the relationships that I build with my guests.
Everybody has hair, and everybody needs to get it cut. We all have someone who plays this role in our lives. Patrick and Buster are just two examples of how Charlotte works it.
Hi, I'm Jill,
I'm Kevin.
And I'm Stephanie, and this is the Work It Podcast.
where we have conversations with people about their relationships with their jobs and how it shapes their view of the world.
So there's a little snippet of what you submitted, and was the winning submission. Will you be specifically seeking out people who love their work, or will you be talking to people who don't like their work, or people who have been affected positively or negatively by their work?
So, no and no, I think. So the goal isn't to specifically look for people who have a positive take. We have a suspicion that those will be the people who primarily want to talk to us. But if you have something, a negative reaction to your job, or you have those deep mixed feelings, then we're not going to shy away from it, and we don't want to censor it.
Your podcast has production values to it. A lot of podcasts that I listen to, it's just basically somebody plays a little piece of music to start, and they sit here and they talk to this thing right here for however long they want to, and then it's over, and the next one is downloaded to your device. You have production value. You had to go out and interview people and edit and mix. What about this process surprised you? Because this is work.
Oh my gosh, it's work. And what surprised me is how hard it is to write an episode. So Joni had us writing down like what we thought this episode was going to look like before we had interviewed people. Whoa. And we didn't know what we were going to find. What was also interesting and sort of difficult is to think about this podcast format where you've got to like hook them up front, and then you got to do your little what is this? What is the episode about? What is the podcast about? Who are these people? And then get into the story and then have it, progress so that people are getting deeper and deeper and deeper as the story goes along. Mm-hmm. And that takes a lot more work and thought than just sitting in front of a microphone.
What do you hope listeners to your podcast will take from it?
A deeper understanding of what it's like, what the experience of other people in Charlotte have. So that maybe they'll find a connection. I've never thought about being a barber, ever. But I totally relate to the idea of if you do something that you love, you don't actually work. And the way Buster talks about work is he keeps saying he doesn't want a job. He doesn't have a job. He doesn't go to work. He does go to work. He just loves it. And so he doesn't think of it as work. Right. And so we hope that people will find that deeper connection and be able to see how they relate to people that they may not necessarily think that they do.
But on the other hand, so one of the big inspirations for this podcast was Studs Terkel's book, Working. Right. And I'm sure you've read it, right? Like it just, when you read the stories of people and their relationships with their job, it creates a deep connection with that person, but it also holds up a mirror to the way that you treat people, because you get to see the impact of interactions people have. So even though the clip has Patrick talking very positively about his job, when I asked him what the major misconception was about that people have about barbers, he immediately went into, I have these guys that come in and they assume I couldn't cut it in college. They assume that I'm a guy that just couldn't make it in some other place, so I defaulted into this career, and that it's not a good job. It's a low-level job. And he was talking about the feeling he has from some of his clients. And when you hear that, you go, oh, there's always this kind of class undertone when people are talking about their jobs that gives you a different view of how society works and how it could work.
Well, in America, the first question strangers ask you is, what do you do? They don't do that in other countries. And if you don't do something that's superlative, then you're obviously subpar in some way, I guess, is the undercurrent there. Joni, this is a 6-episode development arrangement. Mm-hmm. What happens after that? Can they take this off and continue on without our supervision or?
Mike, we are just still reeling from Saturday's event. I mean, we are still hungover from that. But no, in all honesty, I think we'll just see what happens. I mean, we're so excited to produce these 6 episodes. And
When does it start?
well, we're going to start
When
production.
does it drop, as they say?
Oh, yeah. No,
A good question.
it is.
Joni.
So we are actually going to start negotiating and looking into production this week and the next week. So I can't say exactly when it'll drop. Maybe at the end of this year, maybe early next. But as always, I'd recommend people keep their ears open to WFAE for all those announcements.
Okay. Joni Deutsch is our on-demand content and audience engagement manager and the brains behind our PodQuest contest. Jill Biers and Stephanie Hale, 2 of the 3 winners, 2 of the 3 producer hosts of Work It, coming to a podcast delivery system near you someday in the future. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Technology is all around us. It's constantly changing, being upgraded, and it's inserting itself deeper into more areas of our lives. So every once in a while, we check in for an update to see what's coming down the pike. One thing we're supposed to get in Charlotte before the end of 2019 is 5G. It's the latest generation of mobile technology, promising faster speeds, better mobile streaming of content, and more. But that's just one of the things we'll spend time talking about in the remainder of this hour. And here to help, we've invited 2 guys who follow this every day as reporters. Tony Rahm is a technology reporter for the Washington Post. Welcome, Tony.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And Dan Halley is a technology reporter for Yahoo News. Welcome back, Dan.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Let's start with 5G, because we've talked about, when you were on the program, I don't know when it was, 18 months ago, Dan, we were talking about the arrival of 5G in Charlotte impending. It still isn't here yet. It's supposed to be here by the end of the year. What is 5G for people who don't know anything about this, Dan?
Think about it this way: you're getting faster network connectivity. You're getting larger bandwidth. You're getting lower latency. It's in, I guess, the most basic terms, you would be able to download music faster, download movies faster. But it goes beyond that. This is going to be kind of a fundamental shift in the way that we connect to different forms of technology. Think self-driving cars, think always connected devices. This is going to open up new areas of the economy. That's, think about what we had before 4G LTE. Uber didn't exist. Lyft didn't exist. We're going to see Uber IPO and Lyft just IPO'd. These kinds of trends, different types of getting around, different types of ordering food, they didn't exist before LTE. That speed enabled that. So you can imagine that something that's, got 10 times less latency, 100 times faster connectivity would change the economy in ways that we don't even understand yet. But it will be a fundamental shift. But for the most basic person, it means faster downloads.
Okay. It's been described as infrastructure that will change the way you live. That's not hyperbole?
No, I don't think so. I think that that's really what we're going to see. They're talking about things like full-on virtual reality that's fully wireless, a telemedicine that really actually allows doctors to interact with patients, perhaps doing surgery from around the world with no latency involved. And self-driving cars, that's really where a lot of companies have been kind of pinning their hopes for self-driving cars on outside of Tesla. They want to be able to use the constant connectivity and the incredibly low latency, which basically means that, the car will send something and then it'll send that information back to my car or to a building or sign with virtually no delay for it to react properly.
If it's working, because I've never seen an internet connection that does not fail from time to time or glitch from time to time. Is this going to be less prone to that kind of thing?
I think it really depends on what happens once it's in the real world. All of these tests that have been done in perfect laboratory settings. So, they can give us estimates on what we're going to see in terms of speed and latency, but until we get out into the real world and see how it interacts with things like buildings, the glass that makes windows. That all kind of slows down connectivity because it gets in the way of the radio waves. So until we really see that, we won't know for sure. But the best estimates are that it will be able to work most of the time, if not all the time. And usually LTE works all the time. It's just a matter of the interference that we have around us. If we go underground.
Yeah, for people who don't understand all this terminology, LTE is what most people have in their pocket with their cell phones. 4G LTE, which is the fourth generation of cell phones. 5G is the fifth generation of cell phones. And all the cell phone providers are planning to roll out 5G in the near future. But this is for more, as you alluded to, this is not just cell phone technology, is it?
No, not at all. This will change manufacturing. It'll take on different permutations as it goes into different portions of the economy. But it's really not just about our smartphones. That's kind of a happy benefit to it almost. LTE right now is fast enough to stream Game of Thrones on the bus. What more could we ask for at this point? We can order like I said, a car from anywhere in the world, basically. It's really going to change the economy more so than anything because of the different types of jobs, the different types of industries, the different types of businesses that'll crop up around it.
Are the cell phone companies the only people providing this 5G? Will they be the only companies involved? Because this looks like, at least with regard to Verizon, they have something called Verizon Home on the horizon, which looks like a replacement for wired internet.
Yeah, that's the first version of 5G that they've kind of rolled out. And, we're seeing things. Verizon announced that they have the first 5G setup. Verizon is Yahoo's parent company. I just want to be totally clear. But the rollout really isn't all it's cracked up to be. It's a small portion of Chicago and I believe an area in Minnesota. And, it's not full LTE rollout that we saw, right? When 4G LTE rolled out, the stuff that we have now, it took a long time. We were still on 3G, which was the connectivity that we had prior to 4G, for a long time, and people would go back and forth between the two connections, and it was kind of spotty when you would get on 4G. That's exactly what we're going to see with 5G, and I don't think the carriers are really being that clear to customers that, you're going to go out, you're going to buy a 5G phone, you're going to, perhaps pay more for a 5G connection, but you're not going to get it right away. I live in New York. I don't have 5G here, so there's no reason for me to buy a 5G phone right now, and I'm not expecting a connection for a while.
What about the price? Is this just a way for these companies to make even more money from customers?
Oh yeah, I mean it'll definitely help them make more money. Yeah, that's what they're in the business of. But I think it's less of a cash grab than you might think, just because it will be that much better of a service. If it was just something as simple as rebranding the LTE that we have now, well then that would be a blatant cash grab and nothing more. But this is really a way for them to give us better service, better connectivity, better options than we have right now. And it really will be worth the investment. We're just kind of waiting on prices for all the carriers now.
So final question about 5G. All these companies are coming out with 5G, and we know from 4G and probably 3G that not all of that is created equal. Will all 5G, from whatever company you choose, be equal in terms of speed and lack of latency? Only have 20 seconds here.
It depends on the carrier because some are using different types of technology. Some are using shortwave, some are using medium wave, so it will vary.
That's Dan Howley with Yahoo News. I'm going to bring Tony Rum into this conversation. Tony, I promise you, from the Washington Post when we come back from the break, and we're going to talk a lot about Facebook when we come back. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, helping public radio advance journalistic excellence in the digital age. Knight Foundation believes informed and engaged communities are essential for healthy democracy. More at knightfoundation.org. And Mazda of South Charlotte, committed to bridging the gap between adventure and adventurer by helping people select vehicles that fit one's lifestyle. More at mazdaofsouthcharlotte.com. 1 million species of plants and animals are facing extinction because of us. It's an unprecedented figure, but the researchers behind the damning United Nations report say not all hope is lost. How can we mitigate our impact on the environment? Do we have the will to take the steps to save the ecosystem and the planet? They'll be talking about that in 20 minutes at 10 o'clock on 1A with Joshua Johnson, and we will continue our conversation about tech in a moment.
Journalist Ted Koppel is a special guest at WFAE's annual dinner on Thursday, June 6th at the Charlotte Convention Center. He'll talk with WFAE CEO Joe O'Connor about the state of journalism and the health of our nation's democracy. Tickets for this event are going fast. Get details and learn about sponsorship opportunities at WFAE.org. An Evening with Ted Koppel is sponsored by SunTrust.
It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We're getting a little technology update today from Dan Howley, technology reporter from Yahoo News, and Tony Rahm, technology reporter for The Washington Post. Tony, since so many people are on Facebook, and since Facebook is in hot water again, let's talk about this. From an outsider's point of view, Facebook sometimes looks like a company that has outgrown its own controls, or perhaps didn't have any to start with, or many to start with, a company run by an adolescent who doesn't really understand that with power comes responsibility, a company that doesn't seem to learn from its mistakes in handling other people's data. Is any of that accurate?
Well, I think a lot of members of Congress and a lot of federal regulators and international regulators certainly share those beliefs, because all they can see is a sea of headlines over the better part of the past year in which Facebook mishandled information that its users put on the website that deal with the site and its inability to combat disinformation around elections and other issues, whether it's cyber abuse or the spread of things like hate speech. So there's this concern that Facebook got very profitable very, very quickly. It became a major engine of economic growth here in the U.S. and an international phenomenon that almost everybody uses to communicate, but it didn't have the guardrails in place to really ensure that those abuses didn't take over on the platform.
And to be fair to Mark Zuckerberg, who is the founder, I guess, of Facebook and the head guy at Facebook, he seems at this point, and this is just my impression, that he's almost pleading for somebody to come in and give him regulation or guidance, maybe for the government to come in and regulate Facebook and other digital platforms. You wrote recently that Facebook told the U.S. government it is willing to submit to greater oversight of its data collection practices. Is that because they feel they need to look cooperative until the government simply slams them down, or is there something else that worked there?
Well, there are really two things happening here, and the first is that Facebook is under federal investigation. About a year ago, we learned that Cambridge Analytica, a political consultancy, improperly accessed personal data on 87 million individuals around the world, including Americans. And so that triggered this question for the Federal Trade Commission, which is the big privacy watchdog here in Washington, as to whether Facebook had violated a previous order brokered with the U.S. government to improve its privacy practices. And so since then, we've had a federal investigation into those matters and to other privacy incidents that have been brought to light at Facebook. And what we could see is a settlement between the U.S. government and Facebook that changes the way the company operates. There could be a multi-billion-dollar fine, perhaps as high as $5 billion, which would be a record for a privacy violation. And Facebook would have to make changes with respect to more privacy oversight. And those are the things that it told the U.S. government it would be willing to do to settle the probe and to keep this thing out of court. But broadly speaking, to your point about Mark Zuckerberg, he's talked about this need for regulation and has sounded like he's pleading for regulation. But the reality is that regulators regulators are doing this anyway. Europe already put in place tough privacy rules. Washington is now talking about it. So this is Facebook trying to control some of the conversation and show that it's being a more responsible corporate citizen.
I mean, Facebook, Dan, has put $5 billion aside in anticipation of this possible fine from the Federal Trade Commission. And as Tony just said, it would be a record fine. But I've also heard other people say to a company the size of Facebook, with the kind of capitalization and profit that they have, that's like penny candy money. That wouldn't even be noticed, the $5 billion. Is that true, you think?
It kind of is. I mean, if you look at their last earnings report, they actually put in the $3 billion that they're expecting on the low end of the fine. The $5 billion would be on the high end, and so they're calculating in $3 billion already. And it impacted their numbers for sure. Their margin was down because of that, but it really didn't seem to have a problem or cause a problem for investors. And I think yes, there could be an issue with them losing out on margin for a quarter or two. But what really matters to the company and to investors is what advertisers think. And advertisers look at user numbers. As long as user numbers aren't dropping precipitously and are stable or rising, then they're still going to buy ads for Facebook. And that means investors will still purchase shares and the company will still do well. So I don't think that something like $3 billion or $5 billion is enough. I think it's just a kind of a message to them saying we're willing to go higher.
Yeah. So, Tony, if you agree with Dan's analysis that $5 billion is a drop in the Facebook bucket, what should the fine be for them to notice that and to really change how they handle user data?
Well, $5 billion is, in some respects, a bargain, in the words of lawmakers who wrote the Federal Trade Commission just yesterday, because they looked at the fact that Facebook took in about $15 billion in revenue just last quarter, and $5 billion is a fraction of that. But the reality is that there's probably no amount of money that really addresses the problem that I think a lot of lawmakers and privacy experts have. What it really comes down to is structural changes at the company. And these are things that are actively being contemplated by the Federal Trade Commission and Facebook as part of this investigation. And so what my sources have told me is that we could see a settlement that imposes new board oversight of Facebook and its executives with respect to privacy, that requires Facebook to do much more before releasing new products and services to guarantee that they have privacy baked into them, and more reporting to the U.S. government so that the feds can bring cases in the future if they find that Facebook has mishandled user data. Now, in the eyes of some privacy experts, that's still not enough. I think for some, they would like to see Facebook broken into a billion little pieces, turned into a much smaller company than it is today, because they think that its bigness is what puts it in this place where it can't keep control of what's happening on the platform and behind the scenes. But there are some structural changes that have been contemplated, and I think at the end of the day, that's going to be what makes the biggest difference here, not the dollar sign.
Well, let's talk about some of these privacy infractions that allegedly have occurred at Facebook. You referenced the Cambridge Analytica situation, which reared its ugly head in the last election. Canada has decided that Facebook committed serious breaches of local laws over its mishandling of users' personal information. Ireland has started a new probe of Facebook looking into how it handles passwords for hundreds of millions of users of its photo-sharing platform, Instagram. There's also the fact that Facebook, I believe, has owned up to having left hundreds of millions of user passwords exposed in plain text, not encrypted, and visible to employees. How serious is this? How can you run a technology company in this day and age and be that sloppy and careless and even reckless?
Yeah, this is the question that regulators are asking because they see incident after incident. And so the question is, what can you do to stop that? How do you have sufficient oversight over a company that's as large as Facebook, that does things that range from the social networking site to the messaging app WhatsApp to its photo sharing service Instagram and whatever next gambit Facebook might have in mind, like virtual reality. So that's why you're seeing some of these conversations right now about heightened privacy oversight from the federal government. And the probes are even more than the ones that you just listed. In fact, in Ireland in particular, Facebook is subject to 11 investigations right now, and that all stems from the fact that Europeans just about a year ago began implementing the world's toughest privacy regulations that could impose fines even bigger than the $3 to $5 billion that we've been talking about here in the United States. And so that's sort of led to this question here in the U.S. as to whether it's about time for Washington to implement some sort of national privacy legislation that would take aim at companies like Facebook, that would stiffen the sorts of penalties that the Federal Trade Commission could seek, so that every time we get, some drip of news from the company about data it's mishandled, that we're not going through the same cycle where Facebook apologizes and lawmakers wag their fingers, that there are actual consequences for those things.
As governments around the world slap fines on Facebook and other technology companies for the lack of privacy or the mishandling of private information from users, that certainly will have an impact, one would think, because money is money, but also a lack of users or decline in the number of users. Dan, have any of these privacy concerns, either here or elsewhere around the world, caused people to say, I think maybe I should close my account?
Anecdotally, people might say that they have friends or relatives that are done with Facebook. But if you look at the numbers and Facebook regularly reports they use the numbers each month, they haven't seen a decline. They've seen flat user growth in the U.S., flat in Europe mostly, but they're growing overseas in Asia and what they call other parts of the world. So they're still continuing to see growth, and that's really kind of counterintuitive to what we might think of. But I think one of the reasons we see that is because Instagram is doing so well for the company, and they go to great lengths to make sure that when you use Instagram, you don't see any kind of Facebook branding. Instagram is obviously owned by Facebook, but if people don't really recognize that, then they might be less apt to leave that when they hear about issues at Facebook in general.
Is Facebook and any of their associated brands, are they really any worse at this than other technology companies like, I don't know, Google or Apple or Microsoft or people who make other apps?
I think yes. Google has had its own issues. They shut down their own social network experiment, Google Plus, because it had an issue. But nobody's really had as egregious and as many problems with user data as Facebook. Apple obviously goes to great lengths to explain how its privacy policies work. That's something that they're lauding, kind of separating themselves entirely from the situation. Microsoft, you don't really hear about any major breaches. Google, like I said, had its problems, but there's just something about Facebook and the fact that we put so much trust into it and we give it so much access to so much data, and then they lose it on multiple occasions or have it misused, that really sets it apart from its peers in Silicon Valley.
So, Tony, when Mark Zuckerberg told the world that they had set aside $3 billion in anticipation of a Federal Trade Commission fine, he also told the Washington Post that your paper was missing the significance of the settlement. He said he thought the much bigger deal is the things that we would need to do inside and how we would need to change how we operate, and not the size of the fine. What about that? How would they have to change how they operate?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's definitely a point that he's making there, that it's more than money, and then as a result of this, Facebook would have to change some of its business practices, and that goes to some of what we discussed, which is more board oversight, more reporting to the Federal Trade Commission about new products that it's putting forward, and whether the company has done enough with respect to anticipating any privacy concerns in putting out those new products and services, more reporting to the Federal Trade Commission every time it experiences an incident, which would give the FTC more ability to investigate future issues and bring potentially additional fines and other penalties against the company, and then more executive accountability. These are the sorts of things that we're likely to see as part of a settlement here. And it's probably important to back up and explain how this process works. when the FTC brings a complaint against a company, it really has two options. The first is to settle, which is the option it most always takes, and the second is to go to court if it can't strike an agreement with a company like Facebook. In this case, for Facebook and the FTC, it seems likely that they're going to settle because both sides wouldn't be guaranteed to have a good go at it if this thing went to a court case. The FTC wouldn't be guaranteed to get money or to force changes in Facebook's business practices because the judge could rule against the commission. And for Facebook, it could be very damaging from a legal and a public relations perspective, not just if the company lost, but if Mark Zuckerberg had to appear on the stand and defend some of the company's business practices in the court of law and in the court of public opinion. So that's why we're talking about some of these changes. That's sort of what Mark is alluding to when he says that there's more than just money on the line here.
So as Facebook faces these fines, they've also begun to purge the site of groups and individuals involved in hate speech and or conspiracy theories. They've banned Louis Farrakhan, Alex Jones, Milo Yiannopoulos, among others. President Trump, as a result, has threatened to monitor, his word, social media sites for their censorship of American citizens. Is the government working at cross purposes here in on the one hand, trying to get Facebook to clean up its act, on the other hand, threatening them?
Yeah, this is a really tough place that Facebook and other social networking sites like Google's YouTube and Twitter now find themselves in. On one hand, they're being asked to do more to address alarming content that spreads online, whether it's white supremacy, whether it's anti-Semitism, and other kinds of troubling things like violent videos like we saw shortly after the shooting in New Zealand. On the other hand, when those companies have done a lot to remove some of that content, they've taken a lot of political criticism from folks who don't like the decisions that they've made. And so we've seen a version of this play out over the better part of the past few days. Facebook finally took action against a series of individuals, many who are associated with the far right, for posting content that the company itself called dangerous. Some of the people that Facebook took action against are individuals like Alex Jones, the founder of InfoWars. And for those who don't know, InfoWars is a conspiracy theory site that at times has attacked the victims of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting in 2012, claiming that they were crisis actors. There's a lawsuit playing out now over this. So Facebook removed many of these individuals from the platform. And then what we began to see is a lot of criticism from conservative commentators, and then eventually the president's son, and then the president himself, about some of the specific individuals that Facebook took down, feeding into their complaints that social networking sites are biased against conservatives. Now, these sites have said for a long time that they are not biased. There is no evidence that suggests there is systemic anti-conservative bias, but the threats coming from the president sometimes have included threats of regulation. And so this is a very serious thing that these companies have to contend with, especially as we prepare to enter a presidential election season for 2020, as they begin to field even more attacks from folks who don't like the decisions they've made about content they allow online.
And before we move on, I only have 30 seconds here. Democratic Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon, the ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee, believes that federal regulators should hold Facebook executive Mark Zuckerberg individually liable for the company's repeated violations of Americans' privacy. Can that idea get any traction, Dan? Very quickly.
I don't think so. I think that you can't hold him liable for the company itself. I don't see that happening.
Okay. Didn't get a chance to talk about the new folding phone that Samsung has come out with, but we'll hold that for a later date. Dan Howley, technology reporter for Yahoo News, and Tony Rahm, technology reporter for The Washington Post. Thank you both for joining us.